Hello, everyone. I thought I would give my thoughts on reclusive authors, authors such as Thomas Pynchon and, to a certain extent, Cormac McCarthy before he died, and several others, and my opinions on them. Because I actually do have some problems with the mentality of a reclusive author. I mean, I understand it to a certain extent, but I actually don't think that authors who remain reclusive are actually fulfilling the goals that they believe they are. Like, for example, some authors will stay reclusive because, well, before I say that, I will say that reclusive authors, I do think, come from a place of privilege, because there are a lot of authors who would very much like to just put their work out there and have their work speak for itself and not have to promote it. Um, but the thing is that most books don't become successful that way. Even with a lot of promotion, a lot of books don't become successful. Um, and so most authors don't really have that luxury. And so I do think that authors who are successful and reclusive, they're part of a very special and privileged group. And so I think that reclusive authors need to be aware of how fortunate they are in that regard. Because especially self-published authors who don't have a publishing company who will promote their work for them, and or even traditionally published authors today uh, don't really have publishing companies that will promote their work. They have to do a lot of it themselves. And but I do think also that I don't think reclusive authors are actually accomplishing what they think they're accomplishing, because many reclusive authors go, well, I just want my work to stand for itself. But I actually don't think that is entirely possible, because a lot of people will read the work of a reclusive author because they're mysterious, because they're curious about why they're so reclusive. And that's not really judging the work on its own. They're still reading it because of the author's behavior. And so I don't actually think your work can fully stand on its own, because people are going to have judgments about you or not, um, regardless of whether or not you are public. And so it doesn't matter if an author is reclusive or not reclusive. People are going to have judgments about the author, so it's impossible, I think, for a work to stand entirely on its own, apart from the author. And so I don't actually think reclusive authors are accomplishing what they think they're accomplishing. And another thing is that I do think that reclusive authors, and I will give them their due in a minute, but I do think that some reclusive authors can come off as somewhat snob can come off somewhat snobbish, in the sense that it's like they think that they're almost too important, to talk about their work. And I especially think this can be true of reclusive authors who will agree to do some interviews, and this can also be true of some actors as well. But then they will talk about anything and everything, but their work, because they almost think that it's beneath them to talk about it, but they'll talk about politics, science, or whatever. But I'm thinking that, okay, if you're not going to actually talk about the thing that made you well known, then why the hell why the hell is the interviewer talking to you? They can talk if you're not going to talk about writing, then they can talk to people who actually who are actually experts on politics, or science, or whatever. And so I think that, but there seems to be sometimes, like, what you might call a humble pretension, where where the reclusive author is like, well, I'm just a working stiff and I'm not that important, but at the same time, I'm above talking about my work. That's what they seem to imply. So I do think there can be a humble pretension, and I know that that's kind of an oxymoron, but I think I think that's the best term to use when it comes to how certain reclusive authors behave when they are interviewed. And and so now I will say that and I will also say that sometimes reclusive authors can have what you might call an adversarial attitude towards the media, even though it can be somewhat hypocritical, in the sense that in the sense that that they'll say, "Oh, the media, I don't want to talk to reporters. I'm not really reclusive. I just don't want to talk to the media." But yet the media is responsible for why they're popular to begin with. And so there's like they want to like go after the media, and yet the media is why they're popular. And so so I do think it can be somewhat hypocritical in that regard. But I will say that I understand why reclusive authors can be reluctant to be interviewed by certain people, because it is true that a lot of interviewers and people in the media are what you might call parasites, and for example, I don't like it when interviewers or interview writers or journalists interview writers when it's very clear that they haven't actually read any of the writer's work. They just want the writer. They view the writer as content. Well, I need a writer this week to interview. Here it is, but I don't actually care about their work per se. And it seems to me that if an interviewer doesn't actually do their homework, and if they don't familiarize themselves with an author's work, then they're just really wasting the author's time in most cases. And so I can understand why um, authors would be reluctant to be interviewed by certain people. And if I were more famous, I would probably be somewhat picky about the people who I would allow to interview me. But um, but I also think at the same time that even though the media is often parasitic, it doesn't necessarily have to be, because it is because of the media that an author can have a deeper relationship with their audience. So I think that the media serves a function and a purpose, even though it has a dark side, and that it can be malevolent at times. And uh, and I would just say for myself that I personally think that authors have it made, in the sense that usually authors aren't being chased or mobbed by people in public. They're not that well known. Sometimes people might know their name, but they don't really know their face in a lot of cases. And I think the perfect level of fame is to where people might recognize you every once in a while and want an autograph, but you're not being like followed by a mob. To me, that would be too much. But for me, if I became famous, I would be perfectly happy to sign and talk with fans, or do interviews depending on who's interviewing me. I wouldn't want people coming unexpectedly to my house unannounced. That would freak me out. But other than that, I would be perfectly happy to talk to people, because I would be grateful to my fans for actually appreciating my work. And sometimes I think reclusive authors can come off ungrateful in that sense. But I understand why authors are apprehensive when it comes to the media. But I think some of them take it too far. So those are my thoughts on reclusive authors.